Fat girl abandoned, in snow by family. Mountain man found her and said, "You're coming with me?" "Get out!" Judith hissed through her scarf, the words snapping like ice. "You eat what isn't yours. You slow what must not slow. Get out and make your own way, pig." The wagon lurched to a stop in a white roar of wind and night. Lantern lights swung, carving a small, trembling circle into the blizzard. Clara Morrison blinked awake beneath quilts that weren't hers to keep, heavy body stiff with cold, throat raw from the thin air. She saw her father's shape first, Harold, hat brim bowed not by prayer but by cowardice. He would not meet her eyes. "Down," he said, voice torn and small. "Do as your mother asks." "She isn't my mother," Clara whispered, but the gale swallowed it whole. The boys, Judith's sons, were already at the tailboard, hands rough, shoving her bundle of clothes into the drift, then her. Her boots punched through crusted snow to black emptiness beneath. The cold bit so hard her breath came out like sobs. "Pa," she begged, reaching, "please, I'll eat less, I'll walk faster, I'll—" Judith laughed, a thin, bright sound that made the horses toss their heads. "You'll freeze or you'll learn. Either way, you stop being our problem." The whip cracked, wheels clawed forward, harness bells went small, then smaller, then gone, and the storm stepped in to take their place, 1,000 knives against Clara's cheeks. She tried to follow. Her legs sank to the knee. She fell, found only wind and white, the taste of iron at her lip, the oil stink of the lantern fading, a father's silhouette shrinking to a dot, and then to nothing. No one should die alone, she thought. But the world had made a hobby of proving her wrong. She tucked herself into herself, arms overhead, the way her real mother had taught when thunder walked the roof. The thunder tonight was snow on pine, heavy and shifting, and the drum was Clara's own heart trying to shake her awake. She pictured a stove. She pictured bread. She pictured a hand that did not push. Hey, it came from the dark behind the storm, not loud, but made of something that did not break. A figure moved into the skirling white, taller than most men, coat rimmed with rime, beard salted with ice. He crouched, and his breath ghosted between them like a promise. "You're coming with me," he said. 2 arms gathered her as if weight were a lie. Heat bled from his chest through her wet wool. He turned his back to the wind and began to walk, step by stubborn step, the way a man walks when he has decided to make room in his life for one more soul. If you're hearing this in Saigon, Dallas, Berlin, Manila, tell me where you are. Tell me if winter there remembers the sound of mercy. By the time morning clawed its way over the peaks, the storm had spent itself. The forest lay smothered under feet of snow. Pine branches bowed in silent prayer. Inside a small cabin, half buried in drifts, firelight flickered over rough-hewn walls, and the still shape of a girl wrapped in blankets. Nathaniel Winters, Nate, to the few who had ever been close enough to call him anything, sat beside the fire, sharpening a knife out of habit, not need. He hadn't slept. He'd carried her 6 miles through that blizzard, her weight nothing compared to the ghosts he carried already. Now she breathed in shallow, uncertain gulps, each one a fragile victory. When she stirred at last, blinking against the fire's glare, Nate set the knife aside. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You're in my cabin." Her voice was a rasp. Why did you bring me here?" He poured water from a kettle and handed it to her. "Because you were dying." Tears welled instantly, hot against the chill in her cheeks. "They left me." "I know. They were my family." "I know that too." He said it without pity, just truth, and somehow that was kinder than sympathy. She looked around. One bed, one table, one chair. Hooks by the door held a rifle, traps, and the skin of a deer. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, pine pitch, and a man who'd long ago traded perfume for solitude. "My name's Clara," she murmured after a pause. "Nate? That's it? Just Nate?" "That's all that's left of it." Through the following days, she learned the rhythm of his silence. He rose before dawn, fed the fire, checked the traps, melted snow for water. He moved like someone trained to make each gesture count. When she was strong enough to walk to the door, he showed her the forest that had kept him alive, endless white, pierced by the dark spears of fir trees and the thin blue line of a stream frozen mid-song. "This place," she whispered, breath fogging in the air, "it's beautiful and cruel." "Most beautiful things are," he said. They ate rabbit stew that night, steam fogging the cabin windows. She watched him across the table, trying to piece together the man who had found her. The beard, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the eyes too tired to belong to anyone young. When he caught her staring, she looked down quickly. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Anyone would have done the same." She laughed once, bitter, short. No, they wouldn't. That shut him up. He went back to his stew. But later, when he thought she was asleep, she heard him whisper near the fire, voice breaking on a name that wasn't hers. Sarah. Clara's strength returned slowly. She began to help where she could, sweeping the floor, washing dishes, mending a torn sleeve. When she offered to cook, Nate raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The next evening he tasted her stew, nodded once, and ate 2 bowls without a word. For a man like him, that was approval loud as applause. One afternoon she found a small wooden box beneath the window ledge. Inside lay a lock of hair tied with blue ribbon and a wedding ring dulled by time. She closed the lid quietly and never mentioned it. That night he spoke first. "I used to have someone here, my wife, Sarah." "I know," Clara said softly. "You said her name." He stared into the flames. "She died 8 winters ago. Same storm took our child before it was born. I've been up here since." She hesitated, then reached across the table, her hand covering his. "You shouldn't have been alone that long." He didn't pull away. Sometimes it's easier to be alone than to remember what it's like not to be. Clara's voice trembled. "I know what it's like to be unwanted, to be the one they leave behind. Then maybe we understand each other." They sat like that for a long time, 2 strangers bound by different kinds of loss, the fire between them not just warmth, but witness. Weeks passed. Her cheeks grew less hollow, her laughter less afraid. Nate started cutting an extra log each morning without realizing why. When he came in from the cold, there was always a pot simmering and a smile waiting, soft and unassuming. The cabin no longer echoed, and one evening, as snow began to fall again, Clara asked the question she'd been holding back since the night he saved her. "What happens when the storm ends?" He looked at her for a long moment. "It doesn't. You just learn how to live inside it." But the way he said it, and the way his gaze lingered, told her that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't planning to face it alone anymore. The storm eased, but the silence it left behind was heavier than snow. Days stretched into pale ribbons of light where breath turned to frost before it faded, and each dawn began with the same sound, the scrape of Nate's boots against the cabin floor, the thunk of wood against the chopping block, the low hum of a man who had forgotten how to speak to anyone but the mountains. When Clara grew strong enough to walk without swaying, Nate saddled the old mule and said simply, "We need supplies." They rode together through the valley, snow glittering like powdered glass. The wind had softened, carrying only the whisper of pine needles brushing against one another. Clara clutched the back of his coat, fingers numb but heart warm. She had never been this close to anyone. Her whole life she had taken up space that no one wanted to share. But here, on this trail, pressed against the broad back of the man who had carried her out of death, she felt small in the best possible way. Protected, seen, necessary. The trip to town took hours. Red Creek was little more than a scatter of wooden shacks clinging to the mountain's edge. When Nate tied the mule outside the trading post, conversations inside fell away. People stared, first at the giant mountain man dusted with snow, then at the woman stepping down behind him. Clara could feel their eyes like thorns on her skin. Whispered words followed her through the doorway. "That the one he found? She's the big one, ain't she? What's a man like him want with that?" Her throat tightened. Instinct told her to shrink, to apologize for existing. But Nate's hand touched the small of her back, firm and steady. He said nothing, only guided her forward. When the shopkeeper, a woman with kind eyes, asked what they needed, Nate nodded toward Clara. "She'll tell you. She runs the place now." It was a lie, and yet somehow not. Clara blinked up at him, startled, before turning to the shopkeeper. "We need flour, sugar, coffee, and if you have it, blue thread." "Blue?" Nate asked. "For curtains," Clara said. "It'll make the cabin feel less like a hiding place." The shopkeeper smiled. "That's a good idea, sweetheart." By the time they left, the whispers had quieted. Nate carried the supplies, and Clara carried something far rarer, a flicker of pride. The ride home was quieter still. Snow began to fall again, lazy and soft, blurring the edges of the trees. "Why do you stay up here?" Clara asked at last. "Why not go back to town, find work, find people?" Nate kept his eyes on the trail. "People aren't what I'm good at." "You're good at saving them." "That was one time." "One time is all it takes," she said softly. He glanced over his shoulder then, and for a heartbeat their eyes met. The hunter and the girl he refused to let die. His jaw tightened, as if holding back words he didn't trust. "You talk too much for someone still healing," Clara smiled. "And you don't talk enough for someone who needs to." Back at the cabin, the rhythm of life settled again, but the air between them changed. Nate no longer vanished at dawn without a word. He taught her how to read tracks in the snow, how to set snares, how to build a fire that could last through the night. When she failed, he never raised his voice. When she succeeded, he simply nodded and said, "You're getting there." But the warmth in his tone made her feel taller than any praise ever had. One afternoon, as they skinned a hare together, Clara said quietly, "You treat me like I'm capable." "You are," he said. "You just forgot." "And you're the one reminding me?" He shrugged. "Someone has to." The moment lingered, heavy with something neither of them dared name. As winter slowly began to break, Clara found her courage again. She began walking the trail alone, collecting pine cones and dried berries, learning the shape of the land. She sang sometimes, softly, the songs her mother had sung before she died. From inside the cabin, Nate would pause his work, listening without meaning to. The sound of her voice seeped into the walls like warmth. One night, while repairing his rifle, he looked up to find her standing in the doorway, hair unbound, firelight gilding her face. "What is it?" he asked. "I was thinking," she said, "maybe you don't have to carry all that pain alone." He tried to look away, but she stepped closer. "You lost your wife," she continued, "but you didn't lose your right to live." "Don't," he whispered. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," she said. "You saved me, Nate. Let me save you too." He rose from the chair, towering over her, breath trembling. For a moment, he looked like he might turn away. Instead, he reached out, slow, uncertain, and brushed a stray curl from her cheek. "You should be angry at the world," he said, "not kind to it." "I've been angry long enough." And then, without another word, she leaned into him. When the thaw finally came, it brought a different kind of storm, softer, but no less dangerous. There were glances held too long, hands that brushed and lingered, laughter that came easier than either expected. He began calling her Clara instead of girl. She began calling him Nate instead of Mr. Winters. And every time he looked at her across the table, something inside him whispered that this quiet, this warmth, this woman who laughed like she believed in him, might just be what survival was supposed to feel like. Still, he told himself not to hope. Spring, after all, always melted away. But then, so did grief, if you let it. By March, the snow around the cabin had begun to loosen its grip on the earth. Water dripped steadily from the eaves. The stream below the ridge gurgled and stretched, finding its voice again. Inside, warmth had become a habit. Nate still rose before dawn, but now there was always a second cup of coffee waiting when he came in. The cabin no longer smelled only of smoke and fur. It smelled of bread and pine soap, and something else that neither could quite name. Clara had made good on her promise to make the place feel alive. She'd cut curtains from the bolt of blue cloth she'd insisted on buying. She'd polished the old table until it shone, placed jars of wildflowers, whatever she could find poking through the snow, along the sill. In the evenings, she'd hum while she mended shirts or stirred a pot, the tune threading through the cabin like sunlight. When she laughed, Nate found himself looking up every time as if it were a sound he'd been waiting years to hear. They fell into a rhythm that felt almost like marriage without the words. He chopped wood. She stacked it. He hunted. She cooked. She learned to tan hides, to salt meat, to set traps of her own. He caught her once dragging a fallen log twice her size toward the chopping block and scolded her for it. But his voice broke into a smile before he could finish. "Stubborn," he muttered. "That's how people survive up here," she shot back, wiping sweat from her brow. Sometimes, on still evenings, they would eat outside, sitting on the steps with tin plates balanced on their knees. From that vantage point, the valley unfurled in silence, peaks catching the last fire of sunset, the world dipped in gold. "You ever think you'll leave here?" Clara asked one night, watching the light fade. "Don't see much reason to," Nate said. "What if I wanted to go?" "Then I'd take you." She looked at him, surprised. "Just like that?" He nodded. "You saved me from dying slow up here. You can take me wherever you want." Clara smiled, small and private. Maybe I'll keep you right here, then. He didn't answer, but the ghost of a grin tugged his mouth. The silence that followed wasn't the cold kind any more. It was soft, like a blanket pulled over two hearts that had finally found a steady rhythm. When the thaw came fully, the first real storm of spring was thunder, not snow. Rain hammered the roof until it sounded like drumming. They had to move buckets to catch the leaks, laughing as they dodged the splashes. Later, when lightning cracked the sky, Clara flinched. "When I was little," she confessed, "I used to crawl under my bed when it stormed. My stepmother said thunder was God telling me he didn't make me right." Nate's jaw tightened. She was wrong. I know that now. Took a while to believe it. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "There's nothing wrong with you, Clara. Never was." Her eyes glistened. "Then why did everyone treat me like there was?" "Because they couldn't see what I see." He didn't mean to say it out loud, but it slipped free, honest as breath. She looked up sharply, searching his face. The air between them seemed to hum. For the first time in years, Nate didn't look away. That night, the storm rolled on, and they sat by the fire long after the wood had burned down to embers. Clara read aloud from an old book she'd found among Nate's things, a collection of poems, pages yellowed and edges torn. Her voice was quiet, but sure. When she reached the line, "Love is not breathless, it is peace," her voice faltered. Nate looked up. "Go on," he said. "I can't. I'll cry." "Then cry," he answered softly. "This cabin's seen worse." So she did, and when her tears fell, he moved beside her and gathered her into his arms. She fit there as though she'd always belonged. The sound of her sobbing faded to the rhythm of his heartbeat. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Outside, thunder rolled away into distance, and the only sound left was the whisper of rain on the roof and the uneven breath of two souls finding rest. Spring brought green, wild onions along the stream, crocuses by the cabin steps. Clara filled her hands with them, pressing the scent to her face. Nate found her once kneeling in the mud, laughing as she tried to dig up roots with a stick. "You'll ruin your dress," he warned. "It's already ruined," she said, smiling up at him. "But look, we can cook these with the rabbit." He crouched beside her, watching the way sunlight caught in her hair. "You make everything grow," he murmured. She pretended not to hear. By midsummer, the garden behind the cabin was alive, beans climbing poles, potatoes pushing up through dark soil. Clara worked with a joy that was contagious. Nate had never thought of beauty as something that could simply happen in the wild, but now he saw it daily, in her dirt-streaked hands, in her determination, in the way she turned this corner of the world into a home. One evening, they walked the ridge trail together. From there, they could see the outline of the valley spreading far below, the air sharp with pine. Nate stopped by a stone marked with two weathered initials. "Sarah Winters," it read. Beneath, a smaller carving. "Infant Son." Clara knelt, brushing moss from the letters. "She was real," she whispered. "Yes. And she loved you." "She did?" Clara looked up at him. "Would she hate me for being here?" Nate shook his head. "No, she'd thank you." "For what?" "For bringing me back." He reached down and pulled her to her feet, his hand lingering in hers. "You don't have to replace her, Clara. Just stay." "I wasn't trying to replace her," she said quietly. I just wanted to give you something to live for." "You already did." That night, after they returned to the cabin, he lit the fire as usual, but when he turned, she was standing beside him, closer than before. The light brushed her face in gold and shadow. "Nate," she said, voice trembling, "if I stayed here forever, would that be enough for you?" He reached for her, his rough hands cradling her face as if afraid she might vanish. "It's more than I deserve," he whispered. Then he kissed her, not fiercely, not out of hunger, but like a man learning warmth all over again. Outside, spring rain began to fall, soft and steady, washing the last of the snow from the earth. Inside, two lives, once frozen, once discarded, finally began to thaw. Summer came late to the high country. The last of the snow melted from the peaks, and the stream swelled with new life. For a time, it seemed as if the world itself had forgotten cruelty. But cruelty has a long memory, and it never loses its way through the trees. Clara first sensed it one morning while picking berries along the ridge. The forest, usually alive with chatter, had fallen quiet. She felt watched. When she told Nate that evening, he frowned. "Could have been a cougar," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. The next day, he cleaned his rifle twice. A week later, they found boot prints near the stream, too large to be hers, too recent to be his. Nate crouched beside them, his jaw tight. "Someone's been here," he muttered, "and they weren't hunting game." "Who?" she asked, fear crawling up her spine. He stood slowly. "If I had to guess, your kin. Word travels fast when there's something worth stealing." He was right. That afternoon, two riders appeared on the trail, Harold Morrison and his wife Judith, flanked by one of the grown sons. Their horses looked half-starved, their faces pinched by desperation. When they dismounted, Harold tried on a smile that fit him poorly. "Clara," he said, voice trembling with counterfeit affection, "you're alive. Thank God. We thought we lost you." Clara stood by the cabin door, Nate beside her like a wall. "You left me," she said flatly, "in the snow. You didn't lose me. You threw me away." Judith's eyes narrowed. "You've always been dramatic. We did what we had to do to survive, but now there's a chance for us all to make things right." Nate folded his arms. "Get to the point." Harold swallowed. "Before your mother died, your real mother, she owned a parcel of land near Silver Creek, rich in timber, maybe more. Turns out the deed was never transferred. It's still in Clara's name. If she signs it over to me, we can all share in the sale." Clara's stomach turned. "You mean you can?" Judith snapped, "Don't be selfish, girl. You owe your father." "I owe him nothing." Nate's voice cut through the tension like an axe through ice. "You've said your piece. Now you'll turn those horses around and leave." The son spat into the dirt. "You think you can tell us what to do, mountain trash?" Nate's eyes, dark as river stone, didn't waver. "Yes, I do." They left that evening, but the peace was gone. Nate doubled the firewood stack, sharpened his knives, checked the traps closer to the ridge. He didn't tell Clara what he feared, but she could see it in the way he slept lighter, how he stared into the trees longer. One night, while they sat by the fire, she whispered, "You can't keep them from coming back." He looked at her, weary and unguarded. "No, but I can make sure they regret it." "Nate." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "Don't become the man you were before me." That stopped him. "What do you mean? The one who lived only for ghosts?" He didn't answer, but when she pressed her palm to his cheek, the tension in his shoulders broke, and he closed his eyes, breathing her in. "If anything happens to you, it won't," she said, "because I'm not the helpless girl you found in the snow. You taught me better than that." 3 days later, at dawn, smoke rose from the valley. Nate saw it first. He loaded the rifle without a word. By noon, they heard hoofbeats. 4 riders this time. Harold, Judith, the son, and a man neither of them recognized, broad-shouldered and mean-eyed. "Inside," Nate told Clara. "Bar the door." She hesitated. "I'm not hiding." He met her gaze. "You'll do as I say." But she didn't. When the riders reached the clearing, Clara stood beside Nate, rifle in hand. Harold called out, "We don't want trouble, just the deed." "There's no deed here," Nate said, "and if there were, it wouldn't be yours." Judith dismounted, eyes burning. "She's our daughter. We have every right." Nate took a single step forward. "You lost every right the night you left her to die." The stranger smirked. "Enough talk." He reached for his gun. The shot Nate fired echoed through the trees like thunder. The man dropped before his hand touched the grip. The horses screamed. Harold dove behind a stump, returning fire. Bullets tore through branches, splinters raining down. Nate moved with the precision of habit, firing once, twice. The son's weapon clattered to the ground as he screamed, clutching his arm. Judith shrieked, "You'll hang for this!" Nate's voice was calm. "If I do, it'll be worth it." When the smoke cleared, Harold was on his knees, hands shaking. The stranger was dead. The son moaned in the snow, bleeding but alive. Judith stood frozen, disbelief carved across her face. "Take what's left of your family," Nate said, lowering his rifle, "and go. Don't come back." Harold looked up, eyes wet. "You think you're better than us? You'll die up here, too. All men like you do." "Maybe," Nate said, "but not today." They left before dusk, dragging their wounded with them. Clara watched in silence until the last hoofbeat faded. Then she turned to Nate, tears shining in the firelight. "You could have killed them all." "I've done enough killing," he said quietly, "and you needed to see that mercy doesn't make you weak." That night, she bandaged his grazed arm in silence. When it was done, she rested her forehead against his shoulder. "You risked everything for me again." He touched her chin, lifting her gaze to his. "Not for you, for us." Clara smiled through her tears. "Then I suppose we're even. You saved me from the snow. I saved you from the dark." Outside, the mountains breathed again, wind in the pines, water running free. Inside the cabin, 2 survivors held each other while the fire burned low, its glow spilling across the floor like dawn. They thought it was over. For weeks, peace returned to the cabin. Clara tended her garden, humming as she harvested herbs, and Nate fixed the roof, building a fence to keep deer away. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, of life moving forward, but peace in the mountains was always borrowed time. One night, in late August, as the moon hung low and red above the peaks, Nate woke to a sound that didn't belong, the metallic click of a rifle outside the cabin. He rolled from the bed silently, heart already steady in his chest. Beside him, Clara stirred. "Nate?" He pressed a finger to her lips. "Stay down." Through the cracks in the shutter, he saw 3 shapes moving in the dark. Lantern light flickered on steel. One voice, thin, shaking with hatred, cut through the quiet. "It's time she paid for what she took." Judith. They came fast. The first bullet shattered the window. Nate shoved Clara to the floor, grabbing his rifle. "Basement!" he barked. "Now!" "I'm not leaving you." "Clara, I said I'm not." She grabbed the pistol he'd taught her to shoot and crouched behind the overturned table. Judith and her surviving son burst through the door, faces ghost pale in the lantern light. Behind them came another man, one Nate didn't recognize, hired muscle, his grin wide and rotten. "Evening," the stranger sneered. "Heard you been keeping a lady that don't belong to you." Nate raised his rifle. "She doesn't belong to anyone." The blast split the air. The stranger fell back, clutching his chest. The son fired wildly in return, a bullet grazing Nate's shoulder. Clara cried out, firing her pistol. The shot hit the wall inches from Judith's head, showering her in splinters. "You little sow!" Judith screamed, eyes blazing with madness. She charged, clawing for Clara's hair. They fell against the table, grappling, candles scattering fire across the floorboards. Smoke filled the cabin instantly. "Clara!" Nate roared. She pushed Judith away and scrambled to her feet, coughing, eyes streaming. "The fire!" "Go!" Nate yelled, ramming the wounded son aside as he tried to reload. He grabbed a blanket, smothering the flames near the hearth, but the curtains had already caught. The cabin, their home, was burning. Judith lunged again, a kitchen knife in her hand. Clara stumbled back, hit the wall. "You ruined us," Judith spat. "You ruined everything." Clara's hand shook, but she didn't look away. "You did that yourself." Nate turned at the sound of steel on flesh. Judith gasped, knife slipping from her hand. She staggered once and collapsed, smoke curling around her like a shroud. Clara stood frozen, the pistol trembling in her grip. Nate crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her close. "It's over," he said, voice breaking. "It's over." They barely escaped before the roof caved in. From the ridge, they watched their cabin, everything they had built together, sink into flame. Sparks climbed into the night like stars being born and dying all at once. Clara wept quietly. Nate put his arm around her, his face streaked with soot. "I can build again," he said. "We can build again." She looked up at him through tears. "We?" He brushed a smear of ash from her cheek. "You think I'm letting you face another winter without me?" Despite everything, she laughed, a sound so full of life it felt like defiance. "Then I guess we start tomorrow." He nodded, pulling her into his arms as the first hint of dawn glowed behind the burning wreckage. "Tomorrow," he said, voice low and certain. "We start again." They began again, with nothing but each other. When the ashes cooled, Nate led Clara to the edge of the ridge where the pines stood unburned. "Here," he said simply. "The ground's good, close to the stream. We'll build here." Clara nodded, wiping the soot from her face. "Then let's build." The days that followed were hard, but strangely holy. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, cutting logs, stacking stone, weaving thatch for the roof. Nate taught her how to swing the axe with rhythm instead of rage, how to measure twice before cutting. She teased him that he was more patient with wood than people. He answered, "Not anymore." At night, they camped beside the half-built cabin, wrapped in one blanket, the stars sharp and endless above them. Clara would rest her head on his chest and listen to the slow, sure beat of his heart. "You know," she whispered one night, "when I first met you, I thought you were made of the mountain." "I was," he said, "until you came along." By autumn, the new cabin stood, smaller than before, but warmer somehow. The blue curtains had survived the fire, scorched at the edges but still bright. Clara hung them over the window and laughed. Even the fire couldn't take these from us. Nate smiled, hammer still in hand. Guess they're tougher than they look. So am I, she said. I never doubted it. They buried Judith and her son on the far edge of the clearing under a cairn of rough stones. Nate read no prayer, only murmured, "Let the mountain keep them." Clara stood silent beside him, a single tear tracing her cheek. "I forgive them," she said quietly. "Not for them, for me." He slipped his arm around her shoulders, pride and sorrow blending in his eyes. Winter returned, but this time it did not bring fear. The hearth glowed every night, and the scent of stew filled the small room. Nate carved toys from spare wood, rough little animals for the child they hoped for. Clara's hands, once calloused from servitude, were now steady and strong, her laughter echoing through the trees like a promise. Sometimes, on still evenings, Nate would look at her across the fire and say, "When I found you, I thought I was saving a life." She'd smile and answer, "You were. Yours." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and forgiving, blanketing the scars of summer's fire. Inside, two hearts, once abandoned, once broken, beat in perfect time. The mountain was no longer a place of exile. It was home. Some stories begin in cruelty, but end in grace. Clara was left to die in the snow, but love found her before death did. Nate had buried his heart long ago, but her warmth made it beat again. Together, they proved that broken people don't stay broken when they find kindness strong enough to rebuild them. If you're hearing this somewhere far from these mountains, in Manila, in Hanoi, in London, or Texas, remember this: you are never what the world called you when it was cruel. You are what you become after someone chooses to stay.